Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We have the pleasant task tonight of talking about the defense from that big win over the Bengals last night. And what a win it was. Here to talk about it with me is Jordan Coe at the Situation Room. Jordan, how you doing?
Good, Ken. Thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure, my friend. And you're out there in Las Vegas, loving life, and won a couple of bucks on the game last night, I am told.
That's right. It had the under for the Bengals in the game and the Ravens. So, fitting for keeping an eye on what we needed to watch for defense. And those guys came through last night.
What was the under? About 23?
21 and a half.
21 and a half. Okay. Very good.
Outstanding. Closer than I would have liked.
Yeah, but you're probably feeling very good about it as they drove slowly down the field for that last touchdown even. Yeah. All right.
That's right.
Huge divisional race win. We always see that meme with Thanos, right? I think it's Thanos is the character who says, what did it cost? Everything, kind of thing. Losing Mark Andrews, obviously a very big loss in this game.
Yeah, Andrews was, it's going to be interesting to see what they do to replace him. They have not seemed to want to use Likely before this, he just in terms of the rotation and usage, he wasn't there, but he's a talented guy. Kolar, for the packages that you wanted to get what you wanted from Likely is there. So it hurts because his chemistry with Lamar, and it makes you a little bit worried about some of these big moments where you need big plays. Andrews and Jackson have done it together. But there are a lot of tools in the toolbox for this Ravens offense. And so, and what we're hearing that it's not official that Andrews is done for the year. I think he's done for the regular season, but he's going to see a doctor, and there's a chance, I think it's really a question of how fast that fractured fibula can recover and whether it's playable or not. But they haven't completely, initially the word out was he's done for the year. Now he's probably done for the year, but he's going to see a doctor and we're going to take a look.
Well, I hope for a second opinion, and if it can be healed in 8 to 10 weeks, that would be great, just for making sure it's not lingering into 2024 at the least.
Right.
But I'm not optimistic. I think we've heard this before with Lamar, for example, last year and the year before, probably also, in terms of, hey, he could be back in the playoffs at some point.
Well, this one is a little different in the sense that it's not performative, right? So Lamar's injury prevented Lamar from being effective in his role, right? I think when you're talking about a fractured bone, it's really just, does the bone have the integrity to be able to play through it? But if Andrews' ankle sprain, which even if it's a bad high ankle sprain, in theory should be recovered in 10 weeks, then this one's more of a, do you feel comfortable on it? And have doctors said it's safe if you're playing on it? Mm-hmm. Whereas with Lamar, it's like, well, his knee is legitimately hurt. Mm-hmm. and are you okay with 60% of Lamar versus 100% of Huntley? I think this is one of those where if he's cleared to play, you're going to get 100% of Andrews. It's just, maybe it's impossible for him to be cleared. I'm not a doctor, so I'm just repeating what I've read on the internet. So please, nobody take it as anything more than that.
Pain management. I would like any doctor out there, if you'd like to hit me up on Twitter with this. Tell me if Andrew's status as a type 1 diabetic affects healing time at all for him. I'd be very interested to know that, if folks out there know that. Anyway, big blow to the Bengals' playoff hopes. Obviously, the second week in a row that the Ravens KO a divisional quarterback. Not looking for that to happen, I got to say. These are awful injuries. The Ravens got a dose of it with Andrews. They almost seem to get a dose of it with Lamar on the sideline. Same kind of tackle. We're hearing 2,500. This is a guy Miller from, I don't know if he's an NFLPA guy or an NFL guy, but 2,500% as a higher chance of injury with these hip drop tackles than with others, and something they really would like to get out of the game if they can.
Oh, just to be clear, these tackles are dirty. Like the way the Bengals were tackling and then twisting and then falling on Ravens players' lower legs in that process is just straight up dirty. There's not anything, in my opinion, there's nothing more to say about it. They were literally trying to ankle tackle and then fall on the ankles of the players. You saw what it did to Andrews. You saw what it did to Lamar. It's clearly being coached. There's no place for it. The Ravens don't tackle like that. The Browns don't tackle like that, and they're ferociously physical. in my opinion, there's no place for that kind of stuff in the game. You saw a similar kind of thing from Simmons down in Tennessee in that game where he dove at the legs of, what was it, Beckham or Flowers or one of the wide receivers. Or no, Beckham came to the defense of somebody. But anyway, when you have these guys diving and going at the lower legs of people and trying to take advantage of it, we've seen Bengals players roll around on the ground around Ravens players too. I mean, I don't know. I just don't think that there's a place for it in the game.
All right. Well, hopefully they do something about that in the rules, but it's got to have that in the rules. It can't just be a 15-yard penalty. The thing's got to have real teeth to it, including suspensions, lost pay. Eventually, if it's really a matter of coaching, it's got to involve lost draft picks. There's no other solution for that. And frankly, when you take out somebody's best player, it should cost you draft picks if you don't do it cleanly. It should be the kind of thing that does that. I don't think there's anything dirty about what the Ravens did with Burrow. That claim is being made, by the way, today, but I don't believe there's anything dirty about it. All it takes is one person, and then there's this kind of pile-on mentality. If you go to a Bengals message board or whatever to hear that, and then hear, it was dirty, and then somebody else says, oh, it was clean. And then they get abused for it.
Well, even on the Burrow injury, it was almost as though the main kind of like the main fulcrum or weight area went down on his non-throwing arm anyway, and his kind of throwing arm kind of got rolled up underneath that. Yeah. But it wasn't even like the main target. It wasn't like I could see it if it was one of those things where. And I thought that the Ravens would have an approach where they were going to be really physical with Jamar Chase. And, if there were opportunities to hit him in the back, they were going to take it, right? Like, it wasn't like it was like one of those kind of things. It wasn't even on the injury report in the first place that, that his throwing wrist was damaged, which apparently it was. So for me, in those kind of pieces, I see them as very different things.
Okay.
But I'm not biased at all.
Yeah, very good. It's other interesting thing, obviously, with the divisional injuries, the name Joe Flacco has risen yet again in this Lazarus-like way. And reportedly, the Browns were looking at quarterbacks today, and Flacco was in for it might be tomorrow, actually. This is scheduled to occur. I think it was today. Was scheduled to be in for a workout. And that may occur, honestly, with the Bengals as well. Burrow's now out for the season. I don't think the Bengals have figured out what they're doing. A lot of the good opportunities around the league are gone, with one exception, and that is Tannehill really trying to get released by the Titans and see if he can find his new spot. I don't think I'd do it. Especially if I tried to trade Tannehill. I don't think I'd do it. And if you're gonna do it, it would have to be something where Tannehill waives his salary for the remainder of the season in order to be waived, which that makes sense for them. Or, maybe it makes sense for them to just hold on and ride it out as is. Though I'm not sure about that. There have been certainly a fair number of instances in recent years where players like Terrell Suggs have been released at the end of their careers to seek a championship in their golden years. When coming back from an injury, or when they've lost their starting job, or even just when the team is playing very poorly.
Yeah, it'll be. I think the cap situation for Tannehill is interesting. I think a guy like Flacco, it's kind of surprising that he hadn't made his way back to the Jets. But you got a team more like Cleveland and a team more like New York, where a game manager like Joe Flacco is successful at. Should be a guy that people should be taking a look at. There's no, and Tannehill is very much can be an effective game manager too. And so, they should be exploring that.
Yeah, you bring up a good point by Tannehill, and I kind of forgotten because there was a fairly significant cap hit that they would have to eat right now. So, yeah. They have $9.2 million in prorated bonus they need to eat immediately, as opposed to at the end of the year, which really means they'd go into 24. So they I don't know if the Titans can do that right now. They probably can if they move around some money. Maybe it doesn't matter to them in terms of when they take that, but it's not a nothing, for the Tannehill is asking for in terms of what he wants them to eat. Let's see what else we got. Joe Flacco, definitely game manager. I would agree. Do you want him to come back with either of those teams? I personally don't. Yeah.
No, that would be tragic. Yeah. Like if I didn't want him playing with any other team in the first place. If he would play for the veteran minimum, like honestly, and I was Baltimore, I'd bring him back to be the backup here over Huntley. I think that you have a more competent team from a competitive standpoint with Flacco in there than you do with Huntley these days. Josh Johnson, like I don't know if Flacco wants to play for that little, but if he's going to play anywhere, it should be in Baltimore.
Oh, it'll wherever he plays, going to be for the vet minimum. But I bet he would want to come back to play for Baltimore and be the caddy to Jackson. I bet that'd be his choice.
Of course not.
Yeah. Let's see. We hear every time there's an injury on Thursday Night Football, one of the things we hear is the notion that Thursday Night Football needs to be eliminated. I honestly don't believe either of these, the things that happen directly related to Thursday Night Football. Now, the one that might have would be Burrow's injury, that there was already something there. Obviously, the Bengals may have broken the rules not to disclose that something was going on. I don't know if he was on the injury report or not, but they're supposed to do that.
He wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're being investigated for it, though. Apparently this happens often. So like teams often leave people off injury reports and the NFL regularly investigates it anytime it happens. So this is not like to make it a thing of, the NFL is especially looking into Burrow and the situation here in Cincinnati. I don't think that it's that standard.
Okay. All right. So it happens a fair amount. Okay. Now I was not aware of that actually. And it's the kind of thing that is one that is Thursday night related. If you have others that are coming back on a short week with a tweak or this or that, or other people can't play because it's a short week, those are good reasons to do it. And the NFL is about the money. The Thursday night game adds a ton of money. And by the way, the players are about the money too. So cut the bullshit that this is about protecting the players. The players benefit from this. They benefit from Thursday Night Football with a larger total pool of dollars to be distributed among them. And I don't know what percentage larger it is, but it's enough that the players union agrees having Thursday Night Football as part of what's going on. And it's just part of the game. So let's not pretend like the players had no part in this decision at some point in the past. What I have found to be really bothersome is the notion of flexing a Thursday night game. I think it would be reprehensible during a year to change it around where all teams are getting one normally and they kind of have the understanding of what's going on. And then you might put them in a position where they get two instead and somebody else gets zero.
I still don't understand why Thursday Night Football is only played by teams coming off a bye. Like this is an immensely solvable problem by the NFL. Mm-hmm. Like literally have the teams coming off their bye play each other on. You're eliminating two things at the same time here. You're eliminating the lack of competitive nature of teams off a bye playing teams not off a bye, and you're eliminating the short rest weeks. It's mind-boggling to me.
Well, it's not quite as simple to solve as the everybody coming off a bye plays a divisional opponent and you don't have anybody playing more than one team coming off a bye. So they share their bye weeks kind of thing. You could do that very easily. That does not take a master of set theory. Once you get to wanting to have somebody always coming off a bye, then you have to either add bye weeks all through the season 1 through 18, which I don't think anybody really wants. I think people want them in the compressed middle area, or you have to maybe double up on Thursday games in the middle of the year, which might not be bad anyway. You would decrease the total number of dates on which you play Thursday, or you could have some Fridays in there, or maybe a Wednesday night game, because it gives you that flexibility. You could have Wednesday night football if you're coming off buys. We certainly felt a degree of fear at the stadium when we saw Lamar being kind of picked up off the sideline and gingerly walking to the bench that this was going to be another apparently same kind of tackle and frustrating. But maybe we move on from the injuries now and just talk about how they kicked the crap out of Jamar Chase in this game.
Yeah, I mean, the Ravens, when they need to, can have game plans to stop individual players and do so really effectively. It was really nice to see them be able to do that without Marlon Humphrey. That being said, they did it earlier in this year without Marlon Humphrey. Mm-hmm. And so obviously from some kind of perspective, the Ravens have figured out what the progressions look like for Cincinnati and how to force Burrow off of some of those some of those kind of the iterations that he's going through and what he's looking at. And they gave up some plays over the middle, and that's the trade-off, right? Like if you're going to get him to look off Jamar Chase 25 yards down the field, then sometimes you're going to have a 10 to 15 yard pass to some random no-name slot receiver or some random no-name tight end, and you live with it. And the Ravens did, and it was an effective game plan.
Yeah. It certainly was effective in terms of any reasonable measure. If you look at yards per play and whatnot, the Ravens have been amazing this year. We're going to get to that a little bit later. I thought one of the interesting things about how they shut down Chase was Stevens probably lined up opposite him the most times, so he deserves the biggest share of this. They held him to only two catches on 7 targets. The 2 catches are the second lowest total of his career. 12 yards, the second lowest total of his career. He had 3 yards in his rookie year on 1 catch versus Denver. That's the only time he's been lower in either one of those 2 statistics. And it really
one of them wasn't even a wide receiver route. One of them was that little end around, where they like quick pitched it, like
you're right.
Yeah, so it was only one downfield pass that he completed.
I was trying to figure out where that 10-yard pass was, and I'm going, back and forth through my notes trying to figure out where that was. Okay, that's great.
Dave and I had an extensive debate over whether or not we thought it was a rush or, whether it was ultimately a reception or a run, because it was one of those ones where he like kind of snapped it and like quick pushed it right forwards to Chase. But yeah, so I mean, downfield they had a great plan.
So it was a little bit of everybody. Darby had an incredible push out of bounds on him. They had, let's see, I do want to get this because everybody had one. Hamilton stripped him once. We had Geno Stone on the 4th play of the game came up and made him alligator arm that wide receiver screen pass. And that was a beautiful play, I thought, from Stone in the early in the game. And then Brandon Stevens on 2 occasions had him step for step downfield. And both times the balls got overthrown. That's something Brandon Stevens has been very good at this year. Boundary corner, really herds that receiver towards the boundary and holds him up there. But one was 10 yards down the field. And that it might have been a little bit more not right on the boundary. And the other one was 32 yards down the field. That was more there. I just a group effort to shut him down. But also, I don't know. I did not see the Ravens following in this game where Stevens was switching side to side. Now, the reason this is sometimes tricky is because when your opponent puts both receivers on the same side, then both your corners go over there. But then you're really looking for exceptions where they switch sides, and all of a sudden you've got Darby at right corner and Stevens at left corner. And I don't think they did that, but I might have missed one or 2 cases where they did.
Yeah, no, right. I mean, it's a kitchen sink approach. It's been like that all year. We've seen that with Stevens. We've seen it with, Darby, with Yasin, with Humphrey. I mean, they're doing a good job keeping those guys healthy, and they're doing a great job. I think it's a lot of the attention has been on the front 7 and the confusing packages that the Ravens have been able to be deceptive on the front end. But I think the Ravens have been equally deceptive on the back end in kind of what the matchups are, moving guys around, not letting them isolate and single out different guys in different situations. And that's been effective. I think that all those things add up to help the team.
Jordan, I'm going to ask you to turn off your video since I'm getting some lag from you right now. Sorry for that production note, guys. I first of all, completely agree with you in terms of what you're saying. The Ravens have been very deceptive in terms of how they roll out of a cover 2 look usually to start the play. Very rarely do they have their safeties up at the line of scrimmage. They do it a little bit when they're in base and they're trying to protect against the run, or when they play the Titans and that's the main consideration is how you're going to stop the run. But they don't do it typically. And they typically rotate out of that. They play matchup zone. They may just play quarters straight up on a lot of times when they're too deep, but they usually start in that too deep and they roll out of that in some direction. Sometimes they, and we saw this last night, they had Hamilton rushing off the slot on the wide receiver screen to Chase, and Stone knew exactly when to release, come up, and put the fear of the hit in Chase and have him short arm that ball a little bit. All right. I hope you're still there. You still with us, Jordan?
I'm still here. Yeah, I'm still here.
All right. Fantastic. Okay. What else? I think we went through all the guys who pretty much did a little bit something on Chase. The secondary shuffled again. Mollett very effective in this game in terms of being in the slot and getting some things done. They had 2.5 yards per play when he was in there on pass plays. So 30 yards on 12 pass plays while they were in this standard nickel formation, which is the one that Mollett plays in. And then they played the rest of them. They played big nickel. And that's the one, of course, where Hamilton is up front and Stone is in on the back end. That was also effective.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think my one big picture kind of takeaway from what the Ravens defense has done over the last, 3 or 4 weeks, it seems like they've really started to dial back some of the really kind of deceptive, unbalanced, this guy coming from this place. I think they're trying to maybe see what they have in coverage from guys like Queen. I mean, I think we've seen Queen kind of take a little bit of an overall step back. But yes. I think that's just because also it's because they're putting him in situations that he's not best at, right? I think they're doing that on purpose. And I think that there's a little bit of gamemanship going on right now with the Ravens to put things on film that they want teams to try and attack and things that they're going to see. And then when these games, in the more critical games, and they've got some big AFC critical games, right? The Miami game, right? And non-divisional teams too, right? I think that's also part of it. But the Miami game and the Jacksonville game will be the two, right, that you'd circle. I think once we get to those points and we get to the playoffs, you're going to see them get back to some of that creativity and all of kind of the mad scientist stuff. And right now they're trying to force teams to approach it like they're not always going to be doing that. They don't want to give away all those packages. They don't want to put it all on tape, and they don't want to all do that. And I think they're biding their time a little bit. And I think we've seen both in Cleveland and the Cincinnati games a little bit of regression from the overall performance of the defense. But I think those have been out of plays where they just aren't doing anything interesting. I mean, the Ravens had probably 20 plays too many by my taste of rush 4, base package zone, like very obvious what they were doing on defense. And I hope that's not a trend that is here to stay for this team.
Well, it's been remarkably effective whenever they've used it, is all I have to say about it. I kind of like.
I would disagree with that, though. I mean, I think if you look at the Cleveland game, it's very much not the case that was effective. The Deshaun Watson, once they kind of got into that base stuff, ripped them apart. And then the only reason Cincinnati was terribly ineffective was because Joe Burrow didn't play the second half.
Well, I would take issue with that. In the Cleveland game, it was any elements of deception that McDonald threw didn't work. It was when he rushed 5+, they were better. When they blitzed, they were very good. When they stunted, which is a ton in that game, 20 total stunts in that game, they were very effective. When they used any kind of simulated pressure, they were effective. And when they combined any of those elements, they were super effective. And that was one of my points in going on the radio and the article this last week, was just how ridiculously effective they were when McDonald did anything special, and how Watson really had decoded it. And Stefanski with the game plan as well, because they basically, when the Ravens were stunting and we knew it was coming down after down after down in that second half, they were just getting the ball out quick. Stunts take time to develop. And it's one of the things, if you have the ball out quick, it's an excellent way to attack a stunting defense, is to just get that ball out quickly, because they basically can't stop that. And I thought, anyway, we'll see how they play this out in the long time, because McDonald is very adaptable in terms of what he wants to use against a particular quarterback. And a Dobbs, who's not a great quarterback, but is really good at decoding pressure. They didn't do a lot of the blitzing, particularly from off ball. And what else did they not do? Simulated pressure. They had 0 simulated pressures against Dobbs, because he can figure those things out at the line of scrimmage. So they have different plans for different quarterbacks. And I think, I haven't felt like they've fallen into a rut, other than they always have 2 committed linebackers on the field, and they always have only 2 outside linebackers, because they just don't have enough healthy bodies right now.
Yeah, I think that's, I think I would just say that the overall performance of what we're getting on net from the defense, I'd like it to be a little bit better. So it's hard to argue with the results of what we're getting here, but I think that it just feels like there are situations where the Ravens are, I want to see a simulated pressure, and we get a standard rush 4 cover 3 look.
Okay, we're gonna take a moment. Okay, not just yet, but we're gonna take a moment when we talk about the pass rush to compare this team to both the 2000 and 2006 defenses, and maybe we can change your mind with that. But we'll let that simmer down for a little bit while we talk about a couple other things as we go on the way to that. I think we talked a little bit about how the secondary is deployed. They won the snap count 60-59. This was a very important game to win the snap count. I think that some of this was missed. Broderick Washington, a late scratch for this game. I don't know the reason. I am concerned about the reason because, they really need him to take snaps at this point. They're not playing any outside linebackers kicked inside. So it ends up being they need about almost 44% of snaps from each of the 5 defensive linemen they have on average in order to fill up the snaps. Well, you get to 44% of, 70 snaps is too many for a lot of those guys. That's 31 snaps, and your Urban is only going to play 20 of those at pretty much the most, and so that means somebody else has got to play 40. And when your defensive linemen are getting up to about 40 snaps, that's just too darn many. And I would be in favor of them just activating a 6th defensive lineman on game day. I had a discussion. How would you feel about that, by the way, if they had to sacrifice, say, a corner or an inside linebacker for that?
I mean, the challenge is really the special teams unit, right?
Yep.
Which struggled early in the year and has really tightened up. And so it's clear that there's some priority there in terms of what the Ravens' approach has been. I mean, I think they didn't suffer in this game overall in terms of not having Washington in there, but I think you do run the risk of some of these guys getting hurt or, overplaying some of them and being a little bit worried about that, But the Ravens have been, Mike McDonald's been a little Brandon Staley-ish, right, if you will, in that he's been committed to light boxes against running situations and just letting teams run in those situations. And I think we saw some mix and runs last night. We definitely saw some forward runs in the Cleveland game where situationally you might want the Ravens to be a little heavier up front, but they've just decided that that's not going to be their full committed approach. And quite frankly, that's a big shift historically for this Baltimore Ravens team.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that's a great point you're making right now. I think this is the first time ever, certainly this late in the season, but it might be as late as maybe 3 games into any season, that the Ravens actually have a higher average rush yards against than yards given up per pass play. Think about how extraordinary that is, because you typically give up maybe, even pretty good teams give up over 6 yards per pass play pretty frequently, or in the high 5s at the least. And almost no one has ever given up that in a rushing season. And then you think about Ravens history and, the
right.
point you just made, the first 21 years of Ravens history, they never gave up even 4.0 yards per carry. They gave up 4.0 rounded once, but they never gave up as high as 4.0 exactly. So, and then, even since then, they haven't ever really had a terrible year. They've been up 4.3, I think, in a year. But still, I mean, you're always going to give up more than 4.3 yards passing. But this year, they're giving up 4.3 yards per rush. And let me go to it right now. They're giving up, and I'm going to exclude the kneels from this.
Aaron Rodgers' season is officially over, but yours has just begun at MyBookie. NFL, college ball, and a brand new cash-out system gives you options to bet and win all season long. First 2 legs of your parlay hit, cash out early and place another bet, or let it ride for a chance at an even bigger payday. Join us at MyBookie for an entire season filled with daily odd boost, same-game parlays, and huge prize pool contests. Right now, MyBookie has a no-strings-attached cash bonus that lets you deposit and withdraw quick. Use the promo code RAVENS on your first deposit of $50 or more, and you can receive up to $200 in cash instantly credited to your MyBookie account. That's promo code RAVENS to claim your cash bonus now. You can bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie.
Yes, they're actually giving up 4.5 rush yards per carry when you exclude the kneels now this year. and they're only giving up 4.3 yards per pass. That is just freaking
That's an
remarkable.
incredible.
Yeah.
That's an incredible number defensively on the pass protection. But yeah, I mean, there have been situations where I wanted the Ravens to have more guys in the box on like 3rd and 4. And I think this is kind of the point I was making earlier. There were situations where I felt like it was 3rd and 4 and the Ravens were still only 6 guys in the box. And in those situations, you're just used to the Ravens loading up the box, simulated pressures, like you don't know who's coming from where. I think those will come back. I think part of that is that you're playing divisional teams. You want to do something a little uncharacteristic, but it's out of character to watch.
Yeah, we certainly had some variation in defensive coordinator, which would tell us that's the way defenses played. And Rex Ryan and Wink were 2 of the greatest defensive coordinators the Ravens have ever had, and they both play a extraordinary high pressure game, and they flip things around to try and confuse you at the line of scrimmage on where the coverages and the simulated pressure is coming from, but they do it by simulating pressure, I should say. But then again, those teams had fantastic drop to cover players, and I specifically am talking about outside linebackers. In the day of Ryan, they had Dallas Thomas, who was as good as it got, maybe in the NFL in this century, in terms of players who could drop the coverage. And then, the teams right up until this year had Tyus Bowser. So McDonald even had him his first year and made good use of him, but not anymore. I was really concerned about how that might impact the defense, but McDonald has found another way to scheme around it. He's been remarkable at, still using a variety of deceptive techniques to keep opponents guessing. All right, but not enough. I hear you. Not enough for your taste, despite the 4.2.
Yeah, not enough. Not enough.
Okay. You are one greedy bastard. I'll say
that's it. That's it. I want to see shutouts.
All right. Packages. I'll just go briefly. They only use 3 packages again in this game, and they're back to they don't have a lot of package variation. We've been into this almost every episode, so I don't want you to go into it again. But they played the big nickel. They had 7.0 yards per carry allowed on 16 runs, which is a little bit the opposite of what you'd figure, because when you play big nickel, you have an extra safety in there. He's playing essentially as a slot corner, so you figured he'd really help your run defense. Just didn't really work out that way in this game. Obviously, all it takes is a couple of really big runs, usually scrambles, to mess up that number, and they certainly had some in garbage time. They give up 3.6, though, yards per pass on 22 pass plays with the big nickel in there. So still very good in that respect. They go with the standard nickel, 16 yards on 5 rushes, no problem, 3.2 yards per rush, and then 30 yards on 12 pass plays, only 2.5 yards per pass play with that standard nickel. So nice maintenance of a fantastic run of nickel play so far this year.
And again, without Marlon Humphrey.
Yeah, absolutely. He's, I thought Marlon would hurt them more because his physical presence is really important as a tackler, and Williams had really had a bad game tackling this previous week, but Williams came back. I
thought Williams' problem in the Cleveland game was not physical; it was angles. Like I think some of it is just kind of like getting back into the rhythm of the year, but he wasn't even getting his arms around guys because he wasn't close enough to get them. Like he was catching up to guys and having to take them down, but they weren't like this. It wasn't like an in the box about to stuff you step like the Ed Reed at the end of Ed Reed's career, right? It wasn't like that. And I think I personally thought a little bit of it was overblown.
All right. There are people who have made comments like that on Twitter. What I'll say is I have timestamped in my defensive article 7 different plays where his desire to avoid contact, I think, is very clear. And it's not just angular. He's like herding opponents towards the sideline, towards other players. He's like aggressively not engaging in terms of tackling, as I saw it on those 7 plays. But anyway, I understand your point, and it was really nice to see him come back and have a couple passes defense in this game, wasn't it?
Yeah, he looked real sharp this game, and with one game after a long rest and then a bye week, you have to have really high anticipation what he's going to be able to do, and when Humphrey comes back. And so, and again, my desire to want to see more simulated pressures or more of kind of these other looks might also be stemmed off by the fact that you're missing your best corner. Your safety, who is supposed to be helping out on the backside of some of that stuff, is still coming back from injury. So again, still think that I think the volume is going to get turned up on that. I'll be interested for us to come back to this later in the year. And I know we're talking defense here, but I just want to say that I feel like Lamar on the boot action this year has been really good and been really effective when the Ravens have used it. And these are things that we talk about when we talk about these kind of things. We can go back and take a look. I know that was one that you and I don't agree on.
Yeah, that is something I think we don't. I mean, we had boot action happen in this game, and Lamar has a new thing we're seeing more of this year, where they'll set up for zone block left, naked boot right, and he'll see it's not there immediately. Just stay in the pocket and deliver the ball quickly. So he's not trying to get out the right no matter what and throw to one of those three levels. He's going wherever, and I think that is a greatly improved part of Lamar this year. I would agree. Let's move on and talk about the pass rush a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So we've talked about it in a little bit. I'm going to go through the ATS, BOQ, and pressure numbers because I always do that every show. But a really good game of the Ravens getting a good result on two of the three levels. That's usually what I would say you try and win at. But when they gave Burrow or Browning ATS, that was 19% of the time, 7 out of 36 dropbacks, which, by the way, 19% not bad at all. If it's under 25, it's probably pretty good. On those plays, the Bengals had 64 yards, 9.1 yards per play. That's okay. It's a little bit probably below the average that the quarterback would like, but of course it's Browning and not Burrow the whole time, so maybe that's about right. The two of them, and it was primarily Burrow before he left, delivered 15 BOQ balls in this game. 5.0 yards per play, 42% of the time. The 5.0 yards per play is not particularly good. Not terrible, but it's just not particularly good. So the Ravens kind of won that one, I would say, where they got a tie or thereabouts on the ATS. But here's where it really got good. They got pressure on 39% of the plays, 14 snaps. That's not even that high a total. The Ravens have been up over 50 this year in one game. They've been over 40 several times. Those included all 5 of the sacks. And with pressure, the Ravens allowed negative, let me get this right here, -3 net yards for the game. So minus 0.2 yards per play. Anytime you get the opponent in the negative, it's fantastic. By the way, Lamar Jackson was negative 1.9 last week. Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah, it was kind of a dog of a game there.
Let's not talk about that game. We've moved on, right?
We've moved on. Okay, in terms of rushing numbers and whatnot, when they only rushed 3 one time for 7 yards, but they rushed 4 31 times. This is fantastic. 118 yards, 3.8 yards per play, and 5 sacks. 5 sacks in 31 4-man rushes. You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do that if you send 6 to get 5 sacks and 31 times doing it.
And you're doing that with, I think, and this is not a slight, I mean, look, the Ravens pass rush has been fantastic, but I think you're doing that with a less talented true rush front four than we've seen from like the 2000 or the 2006 teams that we'll talk about. But they're talented, they're good, but they're not, OA has really come along, but he's not Michael Burnett, right? Like you don't have like a Peter Bulware guy screaming off the edge. I mean, Clowney is a savvy veteran, but he's not Myles Garrett, right? So it's just, and Matabike has been great, but he wasn't Haloti Ngata in his prime in terms of what he's able to do in just a straight up non-stunt pass rush on the inside of a defense, right? So their ability to do that with these guys has been impressive. I guess I would say the only thing that I would say that is different about that is that is not 31 true 4-man rushes, right? So it's not like a let's line,
they're not all 4 zeros. If that's what you mean, they have people dropping and like Hamilton blitzing off the slot.
Right. It's not like the 2000 defense. You knew the 4 guys that were on the defensive line were the 4 guys that were rushing, and maybe Peter Bulware was coming too, right? that's not how this pass rush operates, right? So they do still maintain some advantage from the scheme and what they're bringing to the team in that regard.
Yeah, it deserves a show of its own, that 2000 defense, in terms of talking about how they set up their pass rush. They got terrific pressure, and they didn't usually use numbers to do it. And then they played a quarter defense. So they had 7 defensive backs on the field for a lot of the high leverage downs, and that really put them in great position to get a bunch of turnovers off it. So they were more of a Marvin Lewis typical turnover team, right, which Marvin Lewis then became in Cincinnati. Although he reduced the number of defensive backs, he wasn't the defensive coordinator there, but the guys he had working for him actually reduced the number of defensive backs on him. So a little surprising to see that be the way of things. Talk briefly through this game in terms of what else happened. The Ravens stunted 8 times on 7 plays. They gave up 4.0 yards per play on those. They used simulated pressure 5 times, 2 net yards, so 0.4 yards per play. So that was quite effective in a very limited sample size, obviously. And when they used multiple elements of individual, I'm sorry, I didn't think I mentioned this, 5 individual blitzes from off ball, 11 total yards, so 2.2 yards per play. These are just great numbers. And when they used a deceptive pass rush that incorporated 2 or more of those elements, there were only 3 such instances, but they went for -2 yards. So it was a little bit similar to what happened 2 weeks ago against the Seahawks, when everything McDonald did went right. And then last week against the Browns, everything McDonald did went wrong. And they tried ratchet up pressure in various ways that weren't numbers. And all of them didn't work. It was just very interesting to see this week to week flow of everything works, everything doesn't work, everything works in 3 straight games. I thought we'd take a moment though to compare this team. The 2006 pass rush in particular is legendary in Ravens history. A lot of people think it was the greatest Ravens defense of all time because they had the best pass rush they've ever had. They had 60 sacks in 16 games. So obviously we're not quite a 4 pace, which is the Ravens are at 4 exactly through 11 games and are certainly threatening the legacy of that team. It's similar in a sense that team really did it with a critical mass, let's call it, of pass rushers that they had on this team. And I think you're kind of alluding to it here is that, the sum of the parts, the sum is greater than the parts this year because they have this critical mass of guys who are figuring out how to get pressure, and then guys also who can clean up on that pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're doing it. The Ravens have been very smart about their approaches on these. They seem really tightly coached about what they're trying to do in some of these situations. We've seen, for example, Patrick Queen be really effective in terms of bodying and screening other guys out of pass blocking situations.
Yeah.
Like these guys are coming in with direct plans. They understand what they're looking at and they understand what they have to do to make the other guys successful to do that. I think Justin Madubuike has been very good this year. I like him a lot. I want the Ravens to, from a cap team friendly perspective, find a way to keep him around. But he is not as good as the total aggregate of his numbers. Whereas you go back to 2006 and you take a guy like Trevor Pryce or Haleti Ngata or Terrell Suggs, and I think those guys were as good in their primes as the numbers that they were putting up. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about this year's Ravens defense to me.
Yeah. Well, Trevor Pryce certainly was the best interior pass rusher in the game at the time. Madubuike, I think the point you make about, in particular, I think it applies to a stunting player, knowing how they can put themselves in the best position and knowing how they're advantaging the guy who's looping over them. You need to understand both. You need to understand how to have the best leverage on the one guy who's still going to be blocking you, and you also need to know how to crash that gap quickly so the guy who's rolling over you right off your rear end is also going to have the best chance to get by that blocker he's going to peel for you. So it gives you 2 chances to get home, obviously, when you stunt like that. And I tell you what, I mean, handing off a stunt is one of the most difficult things that offensive linemen have to do. And even listening to Ben Powers talk about it, since he really wants to focus on a single point, and this is a really good pass blocking guard, he wants to focus on a single point on his opponent, and it makes it very difficult for him to feel the traffic that is otherwise coming up across the to either side of me. He has to do it kind of by feel. But he said that it's so important for him to keep his focus on the top of the right number of the guy opposite him jersey, because he can't fake you with that. He can't give you a head fake with that, for example, which is a classic old school way of beating the offensive lineman opposite you. You can't number fake somebody.
No, I mean, and it's interesting because Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy are so for as much as I think Matabike is not quite as good as the numbers that he has posted in just as kind of like a pure non-schematic player, I think Clowney and Van Noy are the opposite of that. The Ravens have sucked every dollar of value they can out of these two guys. That Kyle Van Noy is not this good of a pass rusher, right? Like he is a smart guy who understands what's happening with him, and he's figured out how to leverage and use the things that they're seeing from that, right? Jadeveon Clowney, a guy that has consistently just like never been able to convert numbers quite the way that he's doing right now with this Ravens team. Again, they're the smart, multifaceted players that allow Mike McDonald to use confusion and to maximize their value, right? And then you throw a guy like Owe, who has been fantastic this year on top of that. He's more the true, Elmas Duverville, Terrell Suggs, like edge, just schematic, doesn't matter. Let him go get after the pass rusher, and he's going to use either his pass rush skills or that's athleticism to win. And the three of them have just turned into a really nice edge rush combination that Mike McDonald has just, he really has. He's unlocked that formula.
Yeah, I by the way, couldn't agree more with that statement. I would say I would not downplay what any of those three guys has done in either the ability to get initial pressure, because we've seen from Van Noy, we've seen that unbelievable spin move he has. Owe, I don't know if Owe picked up the spin move from him or if he had it before and it just has improved since in the last year or so. Maybe Chuck Smith worked with him, and that's part of what's going on. And Clowney, he's been a great first pressure guy and Mr. Almost in some sense of not getting home with the first opportunity for a sack but getting the quarterback to move, getting the quarterback to bring down the ball. That's all you need to do for the rest of these guys to give them a chance to do that. And Clowney's been, as we saw in this game, a great finisher as well. He's picked up sacks that have been the result of somebody else getting first pressure. So I've liked both of these guys are two-way players now, which I just love. I love that the Ravens are constantly high motorizing these pass plays and getting home. Hopefully getting pressure as early as possible when they can, but then getting home when they have opportunities that seem extended.
And it's also, look, who knows what's going to happen with Tyus Bowser, and obviously, look, I don't think anybody should do anything that they don't feel comfortable with in their body, no matter what, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're an NFL player. It doesn't matter how much money you're making. If you think you're going to do something that's going to wreck your body for the rest of your life, don't do it, right? That's what I would tell anybody in any situation. But if Tyus Bowser were, that being said, if Tyus Bowser were to find his way back to the field and he were to be medically up to snuff in terms of what we've seen from him historically, the dynamic of what that could add, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, of his pass rush and pass defense and awareness as a dropper, and just the things that can happen as a dynamic of that. Oh my gosh, and it doesn't sound like Ojabo is going to come back either, but he also kind of fits, and we haven't seen peak performance from him, but again, if he were to come back, you have a guy like Owe and Ojabo that are more these like true, they aren't Swiss Army knives, they're much more scalpel, right? And you know what you're going to get from them. And you've got Clowney, Van Noy, and Bowser as much more Swiss Army knife. Now we don't know what we're doing. Now you're bringing Kyle Hamilton up here. Now we've got Roquan and Patrick Queen, and all these guys are standing at the line of scrimmage. My gosh, I don't care if you're Josh Dobbs and an astronaut or how smart you are. Eventually, you're not going to be able to diagnose that.
Yeah, and you're not the only one who has to diagnose it, because these offensive linemen have to figure it out. That's right. too. So it's
the pass catchers, right? They got it who's going to be in a hot route, right? Like who's going to be ready for because the Ravens have been terrible at that, right? They've gotten much better over the last, I'd say, 8 weeks about this. But Lamar and his receivers have never been in sync in terms of hot routes when pressure has been coming, and that was a part of why kind of that whole Flores high pressure cover zero looks gave the Ravens so many fits. It wasn't that Lamar didn't know. It was that the guy he needed to throw to wasn't looking at him in that moment. So he had to eat the sack.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And we've seen Lamar be all over the board in terms of his numbers versus pressure these last few weeks. Against the Lions, by the way, 22.4 yards per pass under pressure. That's 10 passes for 224. So it wasn't just a couple. Then the next week he was, I think, 7.5 and then 4.0, which are both very respectable numbers. 7.5 is excellent. 4.0 is probably slightly above average. Maybe 3 or 3.5 would be normal. And they dropped to 1.9 this last week. So he's really been all over the place in terms of being able to deal with pressure. And in some sense, there's pressure, and then there's pressure like the Browns can deliver it, and like the Browns can deliver it in particular against a beat up Ravens offensive line that is quite different. All right, I want to go back this for a second in the 2006 defense and just give you some numbers for comparison purposes, because I think this is interesting. Okay, so the 2006 rush, they only rushed for a much lower percentage of the time. So 311 out of 598 pass plays, 52% exactly, pretty much, they rushed 4 men. When they rushed 4 men, they got to the quarterback 9.6% of the time. That's very comparable with 2023, where they're getting to the quarterback 9.5% of the time with a 4-man rush. Okay, not dissimilar at all. If they are getting they got twice as many turnovers on those plays in 2006. Now turnovers are down all over the league, but that was impressive. Overall, and I won't go to every single number here, the 2006 team got to the quarterback 10.2% of the time, 10.2% of all plays. The 2023 team is at 9.9. So only a very slightly lower overall sack rate. Now, where they differ is that 2006 team was get home or go home a lot of times, because Rex Ryan used a lot of numbers. Well, not just a lot of numbers, but also some scheme to get home. We got into the numbers a little bit, but he did use more numbers. But they allowed, I'll give you the number here in a second, because the current Ravens team, the 23 Ravens, at 4.3 yards per pass play allowed. The 2006 Ravens allowed 5.3 yards per pass play. So a full yard additional, even with all that sack loss numbers fitting into that on pass plays. So it's still, that 2016 was a team that could stop the run. So they were 3.4 and 5.3 in their two metrics of run and pass defense. And the current Ravens team is at 4.5 and 4.2, which is 4.5. Yeah, that's approximately correct, which is just diametrically opposed. I mean, to any normal relationship between those two numbers.
It's really interesting to think about and see that as a shift from the Ravens' perspective as a defense and just as a team. You know, that has just not been their mantra and not the way they've built their team historically. And so it's fascinating to think about that change to me.
Yeah, you're 100% correct on that. I'll toss in one more here, is that the Ravens in 2000, the number that everybody remembers is 2.7 yards per rush, but they actually allowed 2.8 when you take out the kneels, and 5.4 on pass play. So even a little bit more in terms of per pass play than the 2006 team did. This current Ravens team in 2023 is in rarefied air right now, and we're actually getting close to a point where it'd be difficult for them to fall behind either the 06 or 2000 team in terms of yards per play for the year. There's only 6 games left. Yeah, they play some good teams, but they'd have to average jump up to maybe 6.5 yards per pass allowed to probably lose their spot at the top of the Ravens historical rankings in terms of yards per pass play allowed. So
yeah, I mean they're doing tremendous stuff, and it's kind of crazy to think that they're that few number of weeks left in the season.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of the nature of having a great year, is that it always just goes way too quickly. And when you're having a bad year, or Lamar's hurt, or you're going through this torture of every week looking at the injury report and trying to figure out when somebody's going to be back that you really need, then it's horrible. But the Ravens are in the good spot. I don't think they're in the kind of the catbird seat on the division. Maybe we talk about this for a second here before we sign off from part 1 here. But how are you feeling about the Ravens in terms of their percentage chance to win the division right now?
The division? I think the division's done.
What about the Steelers?
Yeah, I can't take a team that doesn't have an offense seriously.
Okay. They have literally an unbelievably weak schedule the rest of the way. So I think at the very least, they're probably going to be not at the very least. It's not quite the very least, but I think they might be playing for the division title in Baltimore in week 18. I don't think it's a guarantee that they'll be playing for the title. I also don't think it's a guarantee. Yeah. Yeah. So, I really hope that that's not the case. I hope the Ravens have it wrapped up by then. The Ravens, would really benefit from a rest week then, and the Steelers might give it to them in terms of resting some of their own players as well, so that if there was a question of seeding for the Ravens, they could each take some time off, say from the game, and still potentially come away with a win.
It's a huge, the Cincinnati injury to Burrow is almost more damaging, given though the Ravens walk away with the win and the head-to-head tiebreaker over Cincinnati. It's almost more damaging to Baltimore that the Cincinnati Kansas City game is going to be non-competitive coming up, because week 18, division or not, might be critical for the Ravens being the 1 seed in the AFC. So, let's hope for, rooting for the Eagles this weekend, but for the Ravens to create some space between themselves and Kansas City as the 1 seed. They get head-to-head shots at Miami and Jacksonville. So, we're talking about the 1 seed and, not in a jinx attempt, just assumptions that they're going to win those games, right? You still need Kansas City to stumble a bit, kind of like they already have to Denver, but stumble more for them to have that one seed shot, and that would be tremendous. I mean, I agree with you. The bye week, the health. I mean, Humphrey, Stanley, they're all kinds of guys, all on the fringes of the fewer games that they have to play when it comes to the playoffs. Regardless of whatever you think about Rust and the Orioles and the Ravens in 2019 and blah 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 blah. Right? I want to play fewer games if they can.
Yeah, that's exactly where I am too. I'm not buying any of the. It's terrible to get the 1 seed crap. I mean, it certainly hasn't hurt the Chiefs in the last few years. Yeah. That's for sure. So, but there is another thing here that's on the line. The 1 seed is incredibly valuable, but the 2 seed is also incredibly valuable because it means you guarantee to play the second game at home. So your divisional game is always at home, and the only other team that gets that for sure is the 1 seed.
Yeah.
The 3 doesn't get it if the 2 wins. They have to go to the, and just having that is a big advantage. So it's one of the things that the silver medal, the second prize in the AFC is worth a lot. All right, my friend, always great talking football with you. Really appreciate this. That's lively conversation and highly opinionated, of course. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
Yeah, you guys can find us on Twitter. We've got a podcast, The Situation Room, where we try and do some immediate reactions to games or break down what's coming up in the upcoming week. At Raven Sit Room, my co-host, Gabe Ferguson, and he's at Gabe Fergie. We'd love to hear from you guys there.
All right, outstanding. Other folks who want to be on a Film Study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. I want to hear from you. We've got some great time for that coming up. We got a 10-day break between this game and the Chargers. We've got a bye week after that. Great times to get your idea on air, and I'm looking to meet as many new people as possible. This is the pipeline for people that I want to have on off-season shows. When I have a series of 10 or even 20 shows on one particular topic to cover 2 players, for example, where I find new people who I want to have on and say, yeah, they'd be somebody good to get on to talk about these 2 guys. So hit me up. I'd love to talk to you, and anything you're passionate about is good. Try and keep it a little granular so we can make it a shorter topic. Jordan, really appreciate you coming on again.
Yeah, happy to be here again.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.